Bonsoir tout le monde. Bienvenue. Aujourd'hui, c'est un gros événement on a fait en partenariat. Moi, c'est Marc Schuller, moi, c'est président de l'Association d'études haïtiennes. Going to remind people that there is translation. Please select the English or the Spanish. This conversation will be held in Creole. My name is Marc Schuller, president of Haitian Studies Association. Nous avons quelques partenaires. C'est NACLA, c'est North American Congress on Latin America. Nous avons notre partenaire qui est le AIBO Post. Et puis nous avons partenaire FIU, Kimberly Green, Latin American and Caribbean Center. Donc, c'est 4 organisations qui mettent les têtes nous ensemble pour nous organiser l'événement. Aujourd'hui, on a parlé de la situation Haïti, qui j'aime comprendre crise actuelle Haïti et puis politique solidarité. Nous avons paquet monde qui est là ensemble avec nous et puis chaque monde capable de qu'on est là nous inviter Heather pour parler un petit bienvenue nommé Nakla. Heather.
Thank you so much, Mark. I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today and to everyone who is joining us for this launch of our latest issue of the NACLA Report. The NACLA Report is a quarterly print magazine offering progressive news and analysis on Latin America and the Caribbean. And NACLA, the North American Congress on Latin America, was founded in 1967 following the US invasion of the Dominican Republic to provide anti-imperialist news on what was happening. And it has remained a leading source of research and reporting on the region and US relations with the region for more than 50 years. So if you're not following NACLA's work already and you would like to, you can check us out at our website, nacla.org. And I would also encourage you to subscribe to the NACLA Report, which is where we take a deep dive into these issues. If you're interested in getting your hands on an individual copy of this new issue on Haiti, I would also encourage you to racial capitalism, forced migration, and state violence in Haiti. It's guest edited by Mark and Mamyrah Prosper. We do have limited quantities available for individual sale. So if you're interested in that, please get in contact with us. You can send us an email at info@nacla.org. And our contact information is also on our website. And we can try to make that happen. So I just want to thank all of our contributors to this issue. I've learned so much from working with all of you, all of those who are joining us today, and the rest of the contributors to the issue. So a huge thank you to all of you, and also to Mark and Mamyrah for really making this happen as the guest editors of this issue. It's been just a really remarkable feat of translation and bringing together these important voices to offer this analysis. So I think it's a really important offering that we're putting forward, and I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to work with you all, and very excited to be able to share this work and to continue the conversation here today. So once again, thank you everyone for being part of this project, and to everyone who's joining us today.
Merci encore. Avant moi introduire Mamyrah, c'est on qui parle sur l'association études haïtiennes. L'association s'est fondée en 1987 et c'est un réseau académique qui travaille pour organiser des colloques annuels, mais il y a l'autre projet qu'on a fait pour être capable de comprendre Haïti et puis gagner bon genre d'informations et analyse envers Haïti. En ça, nous avons le plaisir pour nous lancer un projet groupe travail. C'est un groupe de travail qui est organisé par rapport avec Djems. Et puis c'est un groupe qui nous table maintenant recherche académique et pratique sur une série de sujets interdisciplinaires, tant que femmes, LGBT, communauté M par exemple, et migration par exemple, développement par exemple, environnement, d'artistique, quel que soit ce qui intéresse nous, nous avons proposé. Mettez lien sous le chat là. Et puis, thème colloque année ça, c'est nous la période. C'est vraiment, et c'est même ça, on a fait qu'on est là. C'est en discuter, ça que les crises. Et puis, moi, content d'introduire collègue moi, Mamyrah Prosper, c'est un membre conseil direction association. Et puis, c'est un collègue, c'est une co-éditrice numéro là. Donc, Mamyrah.
Merci un peu, Marc. Merci, Heather, NACLA, HSA, Aibopos, LAC, na FIU, pour sponsorisation événement ça. Donc, Jean-Marc dit, moi-même, c'est Mamyrah Prosper et m'a servi comme modératrice à Soya. Mais avant nous lancer discussion, moi, je présenter nous et professeur, poète, auteur, Mehdi Chalmers, et qui pral en performance pour nous de un poème qu'il écrit qui est Les mauvais chemins. C'est un cofondateur magazine littéraire 360 et c'est un collaborateur tout démembré. Il y a plusieurs livres qu'il a publiés, dont Jaillir la solution en 2014 et il y a tout à partir du mensonge, on l'autre texte qu'il a écrit en 2016 et en 2019 on l'autre texte encore Mer libre et autres lieux imaginaires. Donc, invitez-nous pour nous côté Mehdi Chalmers qui va lancer nous aujourd'hui dans l'événement ça. Mehdi, s'il vous plaît.
Oui. Donc, bonsoir à tout le monde et merci. Bon, merci organisateur et tout le monde qui est présent. Je pense que nous connaissons et contribution pas théorique là, son poème écrit un petit temps après premier loc là, si je me souviens bien. Et donc, m'apprécie organisateur et mon qui l'en éditorial là, yo juge le était bon pour nous ouvrir brasser l'idée à un discours qui campait sous symbole avec langage poétique là avant nous rentrer dans l'analyse avec le type discours réflexion sous crise là. Donc, je ne vais pas parler plus, je vais pour nous et texte là qui est les mauvais chemins. Mauvais chemin.
Bad roads. We're tired of getting the stick end of the stepfather's hands. One hand to nurture, one hand to torture. Wood carries no memories. We have will, even more will than rocks. Let's vote for pretty smiles drenched in blood, the Pied Piper as a plantain stab to the face. Why not? The white man feeds us black shit for bags of rice. Minusta and Minijust outhouse flows to deep mines that dredge bile. They never fail to point out how beautiful our land against our thin bellies. We are ever thankful to the sages. If Haitians are oblivious, forgive them. We are ever thankful. Show us the way through hunger's grip. Our children await our return with the pittance. Boss, get the pay is short this month. Be patient. The Lord needs new miracles, given this stale love. We lack the strength to sing his praises. Gnawing at dirt, mansions sprout. The ghetto carelessly sprawls. Government indifference fattens the stones. Is there enough debris left over for slingshots?
Yes.
Merci un peu. C'était Mehdi Chalmers qui était fait partager avec nous poème Nia.
So that was Mehdi Chalmers sharing his poem that appears in this special issue of NACLA. The name of this poem is Bad Roads in English, Mauvais chemin in Creole. So we're going straight into our conversations, few introductions of the different panelists, and then we'll be introducing the format, which is really a roundtable where we'll be asking questions to each panelist so they can think through these issues and answer a bit of a list off from the text that they submitted in special number. That's a special issue. I'll give you the title in English of the article as it appears in the issue. And of course, read these articles, but read all the other ones in the special issue. So we'll be starting with Djems Darbouze. Article name is
philosophe, un sociologue, un
So
planificateur.
James is a philosopher, a sociologist, an urban planner, and an independent researcher, and an activist. Happy to have you with us today, James Darbouze. Also have Djems Olivier, who's a geographer. He worked with Ladis in University of Paris 7 at Saint-Denis, and his research has been mostly on humanitarian responses in Haitian popular neighborhoods. The title of his piece is The Political Anatomy of Haiti's Armed Gangs. We also have Guerline Jozef, who's the co-founder and executive director of Haitian Alliance and Immigrant Fund. She works on the frontier, on the border between the United States and Mexico, and her article will be on Looking for Life in Asylum. Thank you, Guerline, for being with us. Samuel Nesner is with us, who manages the Sukija program, the Cultural Association of Young Haitians. He's a former organizer with the Mind Justice Collective, and he's currently working with NYU University, developing a website on mining issues in Haiti. There's an interview with him in the magazine. So State of Extractivism is the interview with him. Introducing the other panelists, Ninaj Raoul, co-founder of Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees. So they're based out of New York. Thank you, Nina, for being with us. She also has an interview in this special issue, Organizing Against the Immigration Cruelty Consensus. And last but not least, Sabine Lamour, a close friend of mine, somebody I admire greatly. She's a sociologist, trained in Haiti and France, researching the role of evangelical in politics. She's also an independent researcher and the coordinator of Solidarité Haïtienne, and co-editor of Dougé-Prosper, Contre-discours sur les femmes haïtiennes. Everybody on this panel is a good friend and people I admire, and I'm delighted to be together today. So just to remind everyone, we'll be doing a roundtable. All the panelists will be in conversation. So we will all be able to access the text, but we wanted something that was more dynamic, more enriching. So we have a few questions that we had the panelists think about in advance. We're going to be asking the panelists to turn on their cameras and be patient because some of us are in Haiti. So we just want to make sure that at the beginning of the webinar that people will be able to see who's talking to us, even though a few of us won't be able to keep on our cameras throughout.
I'm getting a message that says, please fix the sound quality of the English translation, which is very uneven. So if we could take a couple seconds to make sure that we're good. OK. J'espère que son que nous arrivons Angélie au public qui a écouté en anglais Bien entendez? OK? Donc, j'aimerais dire, nous t'ai préparé des questions que nous t'ai partagé avec panélistes en avance et chaque monde t'a choisi question yo te voulait aborder yo. Est-ce que tout traducteur est en forme, traductrice en forme, mettre continuer?
Ça va?
OK. Semblez-nous en forme. OK, n'a pas avancé. D'accord. Travail ça difficile, hein, on a essayé de faire traduction.
This is hard work. We're trying to simultaneously interpret, but it's important because we want for the international public who speak English and Spanish to hear what we are saying. So please be patient so that we can have everything all set for interpretation. We see that Djems Olivier says that he won't be able to turn on his camera just to make sure his bandwidth is adequate and he can continue participating by the sound. Maybe at the end we'll be able to see him. The first question, we asked each person this question, where we asked them to specify the language we're using when we talk about the situation in Haiti. We know that there are a lot of concepts going around to try to evaluate and provide analysis about what's going on in Haiti. So we had suggested some terms for the panelists to use, which they defined themselves. So now I'm going to share with you the different terms that they use to define opposition. Some said civil society, human rights, democracy, solidarity, social justice, dictatorship, and crisis. These are many concepts that we hear around when people talk about what they see and how they understand what is being called the crisis, the constitutional crisis in Haiti. We asked the panelists to look at these terms to provide definitions or their critique of these concepts. So since everyone had a word to choose, we'll start maybe with Samuel, or we can choose to do otherwise. Mamyrah always chose me as the one to start. After I said your name, I figured. If there's no objection from the other panelists, we're going to go ahead. I'm going to try. Okay. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I commend really these great efforts that the different organizations and colleagues have done trying to organize this session, but also to participate. I have noted how many people have come forth to participate in this debate this afternoon. I commend you for this effort, and I think that this is going to help us shed light on certain points. Looking quickly through the list of terms, there are several concepts that have already been chosen, but I think that we could look at the question of solidarity. And I would like for us to add a concept which is linked with what we're going to talk about, such as exploitation. I think that we could add that. There are a series of words that reflect what is going on right now in the country. I think that these words not just concepts. They seem innocent, but if we look deeply into it, we can see how the current reality has what I could call an attachment to these ideas, just like the other ideas of opposition, civil society, but there are various interpretations of these terms that sometimes does not really go along with what the reality is. Concepts that I try to look at, like solidarity. I think that many times, either in the way people talk about solidarity, whether they're Haitian citizens or foreigners or members of the diaspora, but especially when authorities, when officials are talking about solidarity, they talk about, for example, international solidarity without really looking at the true reality. What is the sense that this word solidarity should have? There are NGOs, sometimes multinational organizations that use these terms to manipulate the society and manipulate, especially the multinational organizations. They talk about helping, having solidarity. But if you don't give me solidarity that responds to the true problems that I'm living through, that really are based on the concrete reality of daily life of people in the society, this is not true solidarity. Even though you can repeat the word, but the actions that go along with it are not in line with the true sense of solidarity, which should really be a joining point between real social conditions of people with a will which is honest and coherent, that is manifest among people that that are showing this solidarity. So this is the sense that this word has for me. And in relation to the question of solidarity, in the case of Haiti and other places, you see that instead of solidarity that is being used, it's a form of exploitation that really comes forth as an action. For example, as activities are done within the communities, especially activities, like I said earlier, they create multinational projects, and we realize that this is not true solidarity, but this is exploitation of people's work, even though the sense of these concepts seem a little blurry as far as the way they are presented in the media. Thank you very much for that. Mamyrah is saying, thank you, Samuel, and I was going to take the chance to Ninaj, Raoul, because Ninaj also had this term that she wanted to define. Ninaj, this is Ninaj. As I agree with what Samuel just said, I am not going to repeat what he said. I'm going to talk maybe about another perspectives, like people who are living in the Haitian diaspora, even though I do not consider myself to be diaspora because I was not born in Haiti. I'm actually a descendant of Haitians, but I'm within the diaspora community. I live and work there. I think that when I think about solidarity and the reality in Haiti right now, I think that people who are participating in the social movement, when we talk about solidarity in the positive sense, not in terms of exploitation, as Samuel described just now, to say that we are here together in the fight, even though we're not on the actual soil of Haiti. We can still show solidarity, and we can express solidarity in different ways through their voice, their opinion, not an opinion that you keep for yourself, but that you speak out loud, because a voice and an opinion can make a difference. Often I see people just stay quiet, cross their arms and say nothing. Oh, this is too much for me. I can't deal with it. I'm not going to say anything. But instead of doing that, it's important to speak out on these issues. There are several ways a person could express solidarity, but what is most important is that you take responsibility and participate in the movement to bring change together, facing a situation that is not right. Thank you, Ninaj. I'm inviting the other panelists to define the concepts they'd chosen. James Darbouze. As we wait for James, we'll perhaps ask Sabine. Here's James. Go ahead. You're on mute, James. Turn on your mic. I chose democracy because democracy is one of the notions that is a concept that is being talked about a lot these days. In Haiti, they've been selling us democracy. The international community and little offices and organizations that they have in civil society that are connected with NDI, NED, or who wish to reduce democracy to a question of organizing elections, any which kind of way, often in conditions that are nearly impossible, so that they could put in place people who almost are without any legitimacy, and with numbers, participation rates that are below last elections, for example, were below 20%. And the democracy is reduced to this. So that is why I chose the theme of democracy to analyze and take a look at as something which is fundamental for me to understand what the crisis is in Haiti right now. So for democracy, I came back to the etymological meaning of the term democracy, which is, as most of us know, from the Greek demos kratos. Demos is people, kratos is government or power. And based on these two components, I came to the conclusion that democracy is a regime where the people, and by people, I mean everyone living in a country, the entirety of the population, they are the ones who participate in creating a vision for their country, society projects for the country where they live, and make the decisions within that society. So the population, the people, can exercise power in that regime through the intermediary in representative governments, through parliament, etc., or without intermediaries, where we have a direct democracy. So for me, I explained that when we're talking about democracy, we are talking about regime where the population exercises power at all levels. And it's defined in all the localities. And these mechanisms are not imposed or given to them, but these are mechanisms that are decided upon collectively. The democratic regime is not reduced to a question of international ways of seeing, moving peacefully from one regime to another, but it's a question of everyone participating and ensuring the well-being of everyone in the society is one of the principles, is a fundamental principle that feeds into the situation in Haiti. In the work that I did, I compared the project of Haitian society, which was created by the anti-slavery, anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist project made by Haiti. So brought forth by this revolution. And this revolution rests on what is formulated in the Wakaima philosophy, saying that everyone is on. No one is above anyone else. And since that is the case, everyone needs to participate. Everyone has the right to be free, has rights, and the right to participate collectively in this social organization to ensure well-being. So that was how I approached this notion, which to me is key and fundamental, which is democracy. And in the dynamic where we are today, when the international community talks about democracy, for them, this is reduced to one thing, which is organizing elections that are not legitimate, spending millions. And that leads to further crisis because the population does not participate. The population does not have any kind of link or any way of seeing itself in this. It's just empty movements, expensive empty movements. Thank you very much. We have a lot of passion and many things to say. I appreciate that we are being careful with our language. We are going to move on to Sabine. Thank you, Mamyrah. Hello, everyone. And hello to all the panelists that are with us here. The word I chose this afternoon is crisis, because for me, it's a word that I've been hearing since 1990, following on the news. It's a word that I grew up with, but I never understood what it means exactly in our reality, because for us, crisis is a temporary thing. You can't talk about a crisis where you don't see the beginning or the end of the situation. And as was said earlier, when we do not properly label the reality, that is problematic. For me, Haiti is not in a crisis situation. Haiti is going through a change in paradigm, meaning that the situation that we're living through right now, if we look at what was going on before the Americans arrived in 1915, it is not very different. And the situation that we thought we had after the occupation, which ended in 1934, it's a situation where a number of institutions were imposed on Haiti, and they were working, whether the General Hospital, the Tax Collection Agency. These institutions date from 1915, and they were created by Americans at that time. But right now we are in a situation where the Haitian population doesn't talk about crisis, and now they're talking about changing the paradigm. Would this not also mean that all these situations that are in crisis, this doesn't have to do with the fact that we are in a society, and the crisis, essentially, if we look at it, it started in 1806 with the death of Dessalines, because the different fundamentals were not thought about. Distributing wealth. If we're going to overturn the cooking pot, so to speak, we're going to find a different way to cook. We can't find ourselves in a situation where there are fundamental problems about how to construct a society, how to imagine how we build a society. What linkages will we have between ourselves as citizens, whatever your position in a society? This was never fundamentally discussed. And at that moment, when we have a crisis, it seems as though we have an organism that's sick, we do a little something, we try to do a little something, have elections, we change the heads of the government, we change the army, we change the heads of the police. But the fundamentals, have they ever been addressed? People who are getting rich in the society, that are producing resources in the society, at what point in the society do we talk about these people? When do we talk about social justice? And when we talk about social justice, we talk about what kind of governance regime will we have in the society. So the question of human rights arises. So starting from a perspective where we see we are in crisis, that means that at one point you have a sick body in front of you. It's not the immune system that fell apart, but it's as if the person has a little problem. You just give them a little antibiotic and everything will be okay. We need to come out of that vocabulary. We may create our own vocabulary because we also have to say that this is connoted with a political regime, which is a democracy that we've been going through since 1986. We do not have the opportunity at one point to say, this is what we want. This is what Haitians want. A way for them to live within the society, whether it's people that are telling us we are in a situation where we want a change or overturning the cooking pot. Everyone is saying the same thing. But if we admit that we are in a crisis situation, we do not have elements where we sit together and talk about on the national level to say, this is how we want Haiti to be. For me, this is the word that is the most manipulated. And I talk about political upheaval, which we've been going through since 1986. And through this upheaval, these are wake-up calls from the society, because when we have these wake-up calls, the masses threaten to take action on the political scene. And these solutions are solutions that say, well, let's not go all the way to that point. We have to take into account all these people who never had a voice, who have their own discourse, who have their own lives. And at one point, they proposed a number of institutions, whether they have their language, they have their system of spirituality, which is Vodou, they have their own thing. But these are all questions that we say, oh, they are not good. We put them aside in the society. But when we look at it, are we in a crisis situation, or are we facing a number of people that are the majority in the society, where the minority are imposing their vision of the world so that they can continue living in the society? This is how I see the question. I don't think that Haiti is in a crisis situation. I think that we are, at one point, we imagine in a fight for strength in the society, and there are imaginary things that we imagine within the society that have a role too, and it's the majority that have their own way of seeing things. So there's this clash between the imaginaire, the way we imagine the society, and for us to say that we are in crisis, I don't call it a crisis, I call it political upheaval that we need to address. They are fundamental questions about how to distribute wealth. Who is a person in the society? When you are in the society, who is controlling is a fundamental concept. For example, women, they work, but there is no retirement. There is no safety net in the society. How do we address that? Why does a woman have to have several children so that at one point she can count on one or more of her children to help her in her old age? We need to adjust all of this. So the crisis is something that encompasses everything. Thank you, Sabine. Since Sabine touched on other concepts, Djems Olivier wanted to define the concept of human rights. So Djems Olivier, please.
Merci, Mamyrah. Well, I'm sorry I can't turn on my video. Would like to meet all the other couples, all the people sitting in on this panel. It's very interesting. It's very important. The term I use, I chose the human rights. My colleague Djems Olivier was the democracy, but
Donc,
these terms go hand in hand,
ma intervention,
including the term citizenship. So I'll be looking at two aspects. First aspect, civil and political rights.
qui c'est résultat
In Haiti, they're the result of the sharing of cities or responsibilities between civil society way before 1986. So after 1986, a few different types of rights that were secured.
Mais à partir de 86, nous connaissons des droits moun yo pas gagné avant que
But there are rights that people did not have or weren't able to use before 1986 that we became in protect after 1986. This is historically about even look at women's rights. The groups like these community doctors of society were active in the first part of the community. But from 1986, we see new facets in civil rights and human rights, a new definition of citizenship.
Tout petit un petit moment parce que semblait que traduction anglaise pas fin clair. Je voulais assurer que tout le monde arrive tendre au Djems.
D'accord.
So the translations into English apparently is fuzzy.
I'm back.
So if we... Okay. Okay, Djems, on met aller.
D'accord.
Oui.
Alors, on t'a dit
I was saying that these rights, starting in 1986 with the new citizenship, which is citizenship that people assume, we see that there's a new constitution starting in 1987 that guarantees a number of rights and liberties. These rights are rights to participate in choosing their leaders. But for the past few years, we see that these rights really have not been respected in the country. If we look at something simpler, like the right for every person to have an identity, where people are living in an unclear legal situation, people do not have birth certificates, that's a problem. And today, as we talk about elections, there's an issue of national IDs that people need. There are people, if they need to go to the bank to receive a transfer, they can't receive it because they do not have that new ID card. So if these rights are not respected, on the second level, we can talk about social rights, socioeconomic rights. And they are rights that have never been respected in the country. For people to have a place to live, work, find a decent hospital to go to, have work, etc. To have free time activities. When we look at things today, someone who's living in Port-au-Prince, what kind of free time, free activities that do they have? These rights are not respected. But in these questions, when we enter into another concept, for example, when talking about no man's lands, they want to have us believe that these are places where there are people that are bandits, and it's just terrifying. But in these no man's lands, as they have been identified, there are people who live there. Do these people have rights? So we were able to accept the concept of the no man's land. These people that live in these neighborhoods are considered as people who do not have rights. So these are areas where there are people who do not have rights. They don't have the right to healthcare, education. They don't have the right to get a job, housing. So these rights that are not guaranteed, we can question the concept of democracy as spoken to by James Darbouze. We can't talk about democracy if we do not have rights. So I think that based on these considerations, to come back to the issue of the crisis, we are facing a citizenship crisis, because the citizen is not just a person who has political rights, but there are other rights. If the person's rights are not guaranteed, and if we are in a situation of crisis of citizenship, we can say that we have electoral citizenship in Haiti. We recognize that as a citizen, my only use is to participate in elections. But there are a number of rights that are not being respected. So that's how I see the question of rights. This is a very good and profound analysis. We already have a number of questions that are cropping up. They are asking for specifics. We will get to you as soon as we can, but we are going to ask Guerline Jozef to define her term before we continue and move on to the questions. Guerline? Thank you very much, everyone. I don't know how we are going to follow the kind of rich information that we've already heard, but I wanted to talk about human rights. And I wanted to come back to the reason why we have a country called Haiti. We have a people called the Haitian people. The reason why we have a nation, which is the nation of Haiti, it's because we have always fought for human rights. The slaves understood that staying in the condition of slavery did not give people access to human rights. And for ourselves, we needed human rights, and we had to come together, and with the enslaved people that came from different villages, different countries, different places from the African continent, who came to Haiti, who worked together with the indigenous people so that we could create a new nation, a new people, because we were fighting for human rights. And we see now that the conditions at which things have arrived, we can turn around and look at the same issue of human rights. In the past weeks, we've seen a lot of hashtags, Free Haiti. And this is deliverance that I see as deliverance for human rights. What does this mean? What access do people have to right to the education, the right to healthcare, the right to fight against violence on women, on men, on people for their sexual orientation? And the human rights is why we keep fighting. This is why the country has come into existence, and it's something primordial that we can stand on and be able to move forward in the society. If we have a country that does not stand up, that is not based on human rights, all the other issues will fall into problems, as we see now. So I focus more on migration issues. What is the cause that makes people leave their country, take dangerous paths to go look for life elsewhere? It's because they do not have a lot of causes that create disruption, as we said, on the national territory that does not have anything to human rights. How are we going to address the issue of human rights? How are we going to correct it and find a way so that we can create a system that is based on human rights, that is based on the rights of people, so that we can really place the country on a road that is more reliable and solid? We always hear people say that Haiti is a poor country. Why is Haiti poor? It's because we fought for human rights. Because what countries have been putting Haiti to the side and preventing it from moving forward. Why is that? And why is it that we cannot come together and stand on a solid foundation? I can share with you a little experience that in the past 2 weeks, where I'm hearing messages from different people who do not want to leave the country, but they feel as though they can't stay because they do not have human rights. They do not have the right to work. They do not have the right to eat. They do not have the right to go to school. They do not have the right for them to even live. So this is why I think if we enter into the heart of the matter of human rights, so that we can direct ourselves in terms of this disruption, which is mental, social, economic, that we are looking at what the opposition. What is it an opposition to? The opposition to the lack of human rights. Civil society is fighting for what? Is fighting for human rights. When we have a democracy without human rights, we do not have a democracy. And what is democracy? Solidarity that we are asking people to bring forward is solidarity so that many hands make light work, so that we can continue with that saying, so that we can bring the change that we are really asking for in terms of human rights. When we talk about social justice, if there is no human rights, there is no social justice. And because of human rights, continue to work to say down with dictatorship so that we can continue working towards development. I'll stop here. If you have further questions, I can answer them. Thank you. The reason why we started the debate with these terms is that when we fight or struggle in solidarity with the Haitian people is to hear what the people of Haiti are saying in terms of what they are asking for now. And I'm very happy that we've had this excellent beginning to the debate. Mamyrah is going to move on to the specific questions that we asked. Mamyrah. Thank you again for your patience, for what has been said by the panelists. There are questions that are being asked, and the public, our audience is asking us to make more specific our definition of the crisis. And the crisis the term is not appropriate because crisis implies something that has a beginning and an end. And as we saw, as both Jameses said, what we are going through now is an ongoing situation. Ninaj asked, what is the basis of what is going on? When did the crisis begin, and what are the more important factors for us to envisage and look at this point? Ninaj?
Bon. Nous sommes numéro 3 sur violence, right?
Numéro 3.
Okay.
Number 3.
Numéro 3 qui dit
the question is, everyone is talking. Was that the question about the crisis that you? But I think that it's a question that warrants development. Ninaj, the question that you had chosen is, when did this crisis situation begin? When we talk about this crisis, I always look at it. I look at the foundation, the beginning of the country, because when the enslaved people organized to throw the colonialists out, it was a problem for other countries that were slave countries. So, for example, here in the United States, they did not want people to know, they did not want their own enslaved people to know what was going on in Haiti. So I think that's when a lot of the issues began. And they did everything they could so as not to acknowledge the existence of Haiti. In a sense, people are always talk about the embargo on Cuba that's been going on for 60 years. I talk about Haiti's situation as a first embargo, because when they do not acknowledge the existence of Haiti, not only do they not have commerce with you, and they also prevent other countries to trade with you. So when we sit here, where I am in the United States, and they talk all the time about Haiti, they talk about Haiti as the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. That is why they always identify Haiti. And we always say, let's look at the root causes why Haiti is in the state that it's in right now. There are a lot of people who there are a lot of people who do not look at the way the United States did whatever it could to prevent Haiti from truly being independent, and they did not recognize Haiti's independence until 6 years after it was independent. And we can continue talking about all the ways the United States continues to go back to Haiti to exploit the country. To this day, these are the root causes of the problems that are about nowadays. I'm very happy to hear you say this, Ninaj, because you touched on the question that is the next one. We've all said it without really saying it. We're saying how the crisis is something that started a long time ago, just like you and Sabine said. It started in 1806 with the murder of Dessalines, which created a big impact on the different models or directions that the country could take. At the same time, I see that the imperialist countries have diplomatically and economically shut down Haiti because Haiti was a defiance of the slave system and the colonialist system that existed. Even though we have not called it by name, this is what it's about. So the question is, how does the capitalist system, right, the international capitalist system, affect and increase the crisis in Haiti? Ever since the 19th century, or even before that, how do precisely nowadays you see that the capitalist, international capitalist system has a part to play in the crisis? And it was James, Darbouze, and Samuel that wanted to address that question. Samuel turned on his camera first, so you can go ahead and speak. Thank you. I really commend Ms. Ninaj, who answered question number 3 very well, and that goes along with question 4, for which I'm going to give a few components for an answer. As a number of colleagues have said already, especially as Ms. Ninaj underscored, what we are calling a crisis in Haiti and all these disruptions and troubles that we are going through, this is nothing new. This is something that has existed since practically the creation of the nation. There's some of them that, as people said, started in 1806, but when we see the question of the embargo, it was from 1804, from the very moment where we took our independence, that is going to allow the major countries to decide to place this country to the side, to really make us feel. It's like as if we were rude or uppity, I guess, to have done that. And this is what puts us in this tight situation, and that will cause one of the things that Ms. Ninaj said, which is almost like a malokyo, bad luck, that is the way the United States played to develop relations with Haiti. And it's a relationship, even though we can't say that the United States has come to recognize so-called the independence of Haiti, it's perhaps bad luck for us, a bad thing for us, that we are acknowledged in that way. And that is going to give the United States a grip on Haiti that is going to continue a project of domination, pillage, that will continue up to the last big event, which was invasion in 1915, where they took the country's wealth, created this so-called democracy that they imposed, create institutions that, even though we can say that they served the country, these institutions, when you look at the foundation, the vision that goes along with them, that really does not go along with the true problems or the concrete reality of Haitian society. And it's going to be, with the United States, it's going to bring to us a series of multinational projects that both have two objectives. The first is to keep the population in bad conditions where we are zombie-like, so that they continue dominating us and continue pillaging and taking our resources, so that conditions can get even worse in the country, so that we have these phenomena that started and brought to the reality we are going through. There are a number of multinational projects. It seems like it's organizations that come to deal with economic issues. You see that they are things that, if, for example, if you look at Shada project, that really created a huge impact, that destroyed forests in a lot of places. If we take the project of exploiting mines in Miragwan and Gunaiv, they are waves of devastation that happen with these projects that were supposed to be useful for the country. You'll see that they are a number of things that, following the same logic, it's domination and pillaging. And it's the same thing that has been going on and led to the evolution of what we are calling the crisis, where they watch every corner. If we have a natural disaster or upheaval, they take advantage of and become more aggressive on our resources and pursue their project of domination. Like when they installed the Caracol industrial complex, or even though they say it's to create jobs, in reality, you see that it's exploiting the labor of other people. It's poisoning the environment and destroying lands that could produce food and create these industrial complexes. These are things that do not match with the real public policy that is in accordance with the country's reality. It's the same thing when we look at IHRC, that really brought solutions that were not appropriate to the reality in the country. And this all follows the same logic. We can say not just in the United States, but how it controls international NGOs, they also have, they are linked with Haitian oligarchy and the way they allow people who are in collusion with them and do whatever they say. Despite these crises, you see that the government is going to deliver land to create free trade areas for industries so that the wealthy can create their industry. And this is removing land from farmers who could use them to produce food. So companies will be working and making money, but these are things that are not in accordance with the reality of the country. That is why I see, facing certain realities, it's extremely important for us to understand how NGOs are working in Haiti. The way there is a kind of articulation between the US State Department and the Haitian government. Not just Jovenel Moïse's administration, but if you look at starting from after 1987, where we could say it was a period when we were trying to bring some changes, they created a way for them to continue controlling the country and continue this logic of domination and pillaging. We have to find a way to understand this. And when we look at what the people are asking for now, they're talking about overturning the cooking pot. It's really looking at another project for society, which is not just something based on democracy, as the United States says. We see that the population does not believe in anything that the United States, more specifically the State Department, can bring that is going to change the reality that they're living in. And you can look throughout the whole history. We don't have a lot of time to be more specific on the actions of the United States and the role it has played in placing Haiti in its current situation. If you look at throughout the history of the country, and the last thing we can look at, the last statement by Pamela White, the former ambassador, you see that the United States, that Haiti cannot profit from anything that the United States can propose to take Haiti out of its situation. We need a Haitian response. We need a response that really is based on solidarity, true solidarity, solidarity that it's manifest with a true emotion to look at the true and concrete reality of Haitian people so that we can work together in all our actions, in all our thought processes, so that we can find an adapted response. Thank you, Samuel. We're going to pass the mic to James and then Guerline. There are a lot of people that are discussing in the chat. That means that people are very interested in this debate going on.
There's a lot of people who are proposing other dates for the beginning of the crisis. So we'll be starting these debates later. We're turning the mic to James. The question is, how do we understand capitalism in this question of current crisis in Haiti? Thank you, Mamyrah. So I tried to approach this question with the idea that Haiti is in a trap. It looks like neoliberal capitalism today. So to follow on Ninaj and Sabine's intervention, goes back to the beginning of our country. So we could say that there's a deeper crisis that Ninaj highlighted. That from the beginning of our nation, there's been a topic close Haiti off to prevent the nation from preventing what it represents, shine, repress the idea of freedom, of well-being from reaching beyond our borders. There's been concerted effort to press this. So the crisis started then, but we could go further back even.
Depuis l'Occident, décidé que y a dominé.
It goes back to from the moment when the West decided it was going to control, oppress, dominate the people, leave the European continent and control resources, wealth worldwide. So to colonize the peoples of the Americas. It's all oppression, it's all domination. So that's one beginning of the crisis. So today, the situation that we're seeing is tied to that vision of the world. A vision where the West sees itself as supreme, a vision of white supremacy, a vision where white people think the world is their oyster, and that they have the right to impose what they want, what their vision on the world, their conception of the world. And when a nation or another group of people try to bring a different
tellement important, nous pas cap quitter ça perdu. Donc, est-ce que can the translators in English?
Yeah, I'm back.
Some trouble, please resolve. People are saying that there's an issue with the sound, and I think that we don't want to miss anything from anyone, but certainly this moment is, I think, answering some of the questions already.
Non, il y a déjà lu.
Okay, Darbouze, souhaitez qu'à juste font-ils reprendre.
If you can go back.
En termes de si nous fait on recule plus loin toujours.
If we go further back, I was saying that we can even define the crisis as even older. We can go back. The conquistadors, when they first arrived, and they came and they saw people living on their land. They found the people with their organizations and their practices, and they decided to dominate these people and exterminate, not just in Haiti, because when we talk about Haiti, maybe the situation is more intense in Haiti because, as we said earlier, the fact that there is a group of enslaved people who came together and fought for their independence and tried to create another society, that's why they reacted against Haiti. It's not just Haiti, and I always say that when we look at the situation in Haiti, we have to put it in relationship in the logic of the world. There is the center and there is the periphery. There are countries that can decide, for example, what is Haiti going to become? And there are two authors, Robert Maguire and Scott Friedman, that wrote a wonderful book in Empire and Sovereignty. There is what we can call an elite. There are people, like in the case of Haiti, it's not the population of Haiti that has the sovereignty in Haiti. They are not the ones that decide for Haiti in terms of the project that they want to put together for the country. For example, it's Bill Clinton and others that are deciding what Haiti is going to become. What are we doing in terms of economic issues? Who's going to get what? is what they're doing something that corresponds with the needs of the Haitian population, the needs of Haiti? And that is something fundamental to connect to the question, how does this capitalist system on the international level increase the crisis in Haiti? I think that the element that we have to consider, as Keb said in a song, in an album that came out in 2017, he says that our misery in Haiti is horse medicine that came from elsewhere, meaning the United States, that killed us dead, for us to not feel as though we're people, for us to disappear. And that's what he says. I found that that song is very expressive of what it is, because at the start of the video for this song, Keb shows that after the January 12th earthquake in 2010, he shows Bill Clinton speaking in the context of a natural disaster. So many people died. Bill Clinton comes as a representative. He says that everyone is here to make money, and he doesn't think it's a bad thing for people to try to make money in this situation. And he says this without any kind of self-consciousness. And it's absolutely understandable that in this situation of a disaster, people are there to find out how can they make money. And he thinks that it's people are there to, it's okay. There are a lot of people who want to speak, and at least 12 questions. There is a task force that we are creating. There's an activity every month. And in the review, there are more than a dozen articles. So we can't cover all this ground in 2 hours. Maybe to conclude, James, really quickly, what I was saying is that the situation that we are going through in Haiti specifically, and we're going to see similarities and see how they look like since the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s, we have been living through a neoliberal paradigm. All the social movements in Haiti that are resisting, trying to see how we can find new projects to apply in the countries. And Djems Olivier had said this in the 1987 Constitution. There is a Haitian project, a national project, which is decentralization, deconcentration, participation. And despite all these efforts, it's always American imperialism, the empire, just like they did in 1828, that with the Monroe Doctrine, that everything in the Americas, all the other countries in the Americas, their destiny should be decided on by the United States. So we have this neoliberal paradigm since the 1970s, where the United States imposed in Haiti and in other countries. And in September 1973, in Chile, with the Chilean army, the United States was in collusion to overthrow a democratically elected government headed by Salvador Allende. Allende was a socialist. He was an activist who thought that money should be after people. The rights of people should prime over monetary issues. The United States installed a terror regime. There was genocide, torture, rape in Chile, almost the same as what is going on in Haiti. So the questions of human rights, violating human rights, murder, torture, and rape were daily occurrences in Chile. Pinochet spent 17 years in power in Chile, and he will invite the Chicago boys, including Friedman. I'm sorry, the interpreter cannot hear. Here, we don't have.
Oui,
to develop.
Mais n'a juste signalé Martin libéral dans un principe qui c'est investissement particulier dans tout domaine. Vous avez dit quelque chose à besoin.
I'm sorry, the interpreter isn't able to understand. We have to work our way out so that we can find everything is business in this new reality, and everything is the market. The market is king and dominates. This is probably the worst system, where the managers and leaders of the system are only interested in money. And that's what Bill Clinton was saying after the earthquake. The Chicago boys privatized everything. In Chile, they dismantled, just like in Haiti. Nowadays, it's a country that is completely in tatters. There's nothing. Everything is turned into business. Haiti does not produce weapons, but 500,000 weapons are circulating in the country coming from the United States. So that has become a market. Munitions, people's lives don't represent anything. Kidnapping, you're negotiating your very life. And this is practically the criminal economic logic of what I would call paramilitary capitalism in the context of Haiti that is unfolding in the neoliberal logic. Professor Darbouze, we're all here. We have a lot of things that we want to say, and I'm very happy that you were able to address the question of weapons circulating in the country, because it's an example where the capitalist system is interested in making money even at the cost of suffering among other people. So certainly to end this question, which is a big question that has led to a lot of debate, we're going to ask Guerline, Jozef, who wanted to answer this question, to share a few words with us. This question already has this massive amount of information that the colleagues shared. Thank you, Professor Darbouze, as you enter into the heart of the issue. I can give a few small examples because we don't have any more time left. We have other countrymen who underscored the fact that we see the economic relation, the socio-economic relation between Haiti and other major countries. We can just focus on the United States right now. We can talk about the issue of rice, where as aid, which is not real aid, how that destroyed the country and placed it in its current crisis position. If people in Altibonite cannot plant rice to sell so that they can send their kids to the school, so that they can improve their lives, they have to go out and look for a way to make a living. But why is that? It's because the major powers came with their rice, which they imposed on the country, and that completely destroyed the rice sector in Haiti. Now it's peanuts, where ever since we were children in Haiti, we know that peanuts and frisco is something that we all have. That was part of our thing as school kids. These countries that so-called help Haiti and peanut farmers so that they have infrastructure and have better yields, what do? They come with things from the outside, where we are obligated, forced. The small peanut farmers in Haiti, they have to buy things that are modified, and that came and destroyed agriculture. Now, coffee, same thing. The economic relation, where they say they're providing assistance to Haiti, is this assistance that has been destroying the country and placed us in this situation. That is why we are talking about violence, internal violence, and external violence. This is why we are saying down with all these forms of violence. That's all I wanted to add, because I know we don't have a lot of time. Thank you very much, Guerline. We are reminding everyone, as we said earlier, that we have a whole special issue where we can look at the articles in full detail. The articles are in English, it's true, but I also want to say that we have an agreement with Aibo Post. They are going to publish these articles in French and Creole. And maybe we can see if we can translate it into Spanish, because it seems there are a lot of people who need this analysis and information in Spanish as well. We are going to move on in our discussion and stop at the question of violence, as James left us with a little bit and started entering into the issue of violence and the circulation of weapons. We want to look at it under all its aspects. What is behind the violence and in all its different definitions? So we're going to start with, James first, since his text is about the issue of gangs in Haiti, and he left us on that point, and Guerline also raised the issue of people who are leaving the country. Maybe James can start with this question and talk more about the question of violence in Haiti.
Olivier, pardon.
Djems Olivier, sorry. There are two Jameses.
Djems Olivier, oui.
Djems Olivier, please.
Since
your article deals directly with the question of violence. I'm sorry, the interpreter can't hear too clearly. All right. There was a little bit of a problem with the internet. So my contribution to this special issue talks about the political anatomy of gangs in Haiti. So it's a reading of the situation of violence that we're going through in Haiti. The violence, as we know, is a concept that is rather large. In the sense in which I see violence, it's armed violence, but there are other dimensions to it that we could have envisaged. Gender violence, there's structural violence as well. But I chose to talk about armed violence, and what we observed, especially in Port-au-Prince. I'm going to start with the conclusion of my article. Port-au-Prince is a capital that is behind barricades. In the north, we see that it's controlled by gangs of Cité Soleil and other areas like Kouadé-Bouquet that control all these areas. When we look at the south, there are gangs that are in Mautissa. When we talk about Mautissa, it's the communal section of Mautissa that has Mont L'Hôpital, Grand Ravine, Tibois, etc. But when we look at the west, we see that there are gangs that control that area from Bel Air all the way to La Saline. And on the east, we can't say that there are no gangs. We see Pétionville, you can find gangs in neighborhoods that are inner city neighborhoods. But some of them, they have different motivations, these gangs. Some are political and some are bandits, mostly the ones that are in the east. In the three other areas, the gangs are very politicized. And these gangs, based on our observations, we see that there is a kind of collusion, there is a kind of interference between the criminal way of doing things, political, and the economic. And these gangs, there is a place where they were created. We didn't always have this society of gangs, because after 1986, it's true we talked about Zenglendo, but there is this transformation that happened in the society where there are armed groups that became criminalized, because in the article we also talk about these armed groups. But that doesn't mean these are gangs. A gang is an armed group, but not all armed groups are gangs. So this is something that I wanted to specify in the course of this debate. In the article, I talk about a number of armed groups that were around in around 2004. These armed groups, some of them were gangs, but some had other issues that they were defending. So some of these groups became criminalized, and the fact that they were criminalized, have been used as well. They represent a political clientele and an economic clientele as well, because they have these political groups that use them. And there are economic interests that use them. On the political side, it's to reach power and keep power, but on the economic side, these groups manipulate these gangs, use these gangs to defend their economic interests, or in the context of competition with other business people that are in the same sector as them. So in the country, we've come to be in this criminal logic. In addition, there are other interest groups, for example, drug traffickers that are involved in drug trafficking, or human trafficking, arms trafficking. Earlier, James Darbouze talked about the more than 500,000 weapons that are in circulation in this country. I cannot estimate, because we do not have any control on illegal weapons. How can we say if it's 500,000 more or less? We can't say specifically, but we do know that there are a high number of illegal weapons in the country. And we can say that there are these institutions that quote unquote work towards disarmament. They started working with MINUSTA in 2004, and there's CNDDR, which is a failure. Even though in the history of Haiti, this is not the first such disarmament program to have been created. Even before our independence, there were some initiatives that were taken, and these initiatives had always failed. The initiative that is going to succeed in terms of disarmament is during the American occupation. There was a whole program that was put in place, but it was not a free program, because at some point there had to be an investment in order to collect some weapons. But starting in the American occupation, there was disarmament that took place. But over time, there is a rearmament of the society. So in 1994, with the return of Jean-Bertrand Aristide to power, there was a disarmament program where who is going to benefit from this program are people who were already rich, who are going to sell the weapons with the occupants, the United States. And the DDR program that was launched failed. And one of the failures is that, first, Haiti is not a country that is in conflict, where you would have armed groups that are in conflict amongst themselves, between themselves. So the first thing to do is to have groups that are in conflict sign peace agreements. We don't have that kind of conflict. So what we're going to see is, we thought that there was going to be the signing of peace accords, but when we see the new direction that these groups are taking, we said that it's not a program, a disarmament program. So we came to find ourselves in a situation of violence, not just a situation of armed violence, but structural violence, where that allows groups that were not violent, they fall into armed violence. In the first question, I mentioned the problem of these no man's land areas. There are people in these areas that have no access to rights, and we can say that these people are in no man's land because they can't exercise their rights, and they become vulnerable to being bought. This is not to say that a person who is poor, that means automatically you will be violent. That's not the question, because now when we look at what is current in Haiti, we see discourse that goes in the sense of going in the neighborhoods that are, they say, are controlled by armed groups. We tell them that they are not innocent, the people that live in the areas. No, these are people that are living in situations of terror, and they have to use survival strategies so that they can continue live where they live because they don't have the means to go elsewhere. And all of this is to say that there is no competition or complicity of these people between these people and the armed groups that control their areas. So that is what we see in the question of violence now. It's not just an issue of armed violence, but people who are trying to survive in this kind of setting. This is what I talked about in my article. I'm glad that you connected the issue of physical violence and armed violence with structural violence. And we are going to pass the mic to Sabine. What is behind the violence that we are observing in Haiti and living through in Haiti? How do we understand that? Thank you very much, Mamyrah. My understanding of violence is that violence, particularly violence against women, what I know and what I study and analyze is what is violence against women, is a moment in the structure of terror that is installing in Haiti. And we see how every time there is political upheaval in Haiti, how this violence unrolls. So when women are murdered in political situations, and since 2006 up to 2021, 2006 was the time when we had mafia killings of women. That was the first case. What was it called again? It was a woman whose last name was Katia, I think Demosten, I'll find the name, who was one of the first times when we saw they took a young woman, they killed her, and they threw on a pile of garbage. So whenever there's this big political upheaval, we were close to 2004, there were serious political conflicts in the country. And at that point, we see that the justice system has a harder and harder time to deal with this. In 1991, there were gang rapes, collective rapes that occurred, and the political message was a means of terror to keep a number of women who were in the inner city neighborhoods that were fighting for constitutional order in that time period. During the military people, there were a lot of people in the military who took part in this kind of violence against the population. And now they have been, they were ninjas at that time. They were attachés is what they called them. And now it seems as though they have been turned into innocent people. And it seems as though the woman's body is a territory where fight occurs between, or war occurs between men. And in these inner city neighborhoods or in other areas of the society, we see that women are being killed in the society. In 2004, we also saw during this political upheaval that caused Aristide to leave power under international pressure, there were a number of things that Aristide was doing that caused him to have to leave. We see that the situation of violence against women was a situation that increased in the period of 2004. There was the UN intervention with the approval of the bourgeoisie. It didn't bring any solutions. The bourgeoisie decided that they were going to come out as winners because it agreed to free trade agreements that were very juicy for them. And it's in this context that kidnapping became a way to manage political problems. There's a question of class and relationships, gender relations. All of these are problems that are underway in the country. And we see that the women that were kidnapped in 2004, we realized that a lot of women declared that they had been raped. And in 2006, the situation took another turn because exactly the body, the woman they found was Natasha Dessous, because they saw it was a 23-year-old woman. They kidnapped her because she was light-skinned. They figured she had money, but her mother was a woman who was not in a situation where she had money. The mother said that the daughter is light-skinned because in 1990, when the soldiers came, she was raped by a soldier. That's why she came out, her daughter came out with lighter skin. So we realize on all these issues, based on the fact that the person's skin color is lighter, when the person is unable to pay the amount that they thought she might be able to pay, they kill the person. And feminist organizations mobilize around this issue about mafia killings of women. And they realized after her body was analyzed, she was raped and mutilated, cut off her breasts. Things that we see are going on. For example, in Mexico with Ciudad Juarez, we see that we're facing the same kind of situation. We came to realize also that MINUSTA at the same time, which is called a stabilization force, MINUSTA itself is partaking in rape of young women and young men, and also bringing disease to the society that were not there. So we are in a situation where there is a set of relations, power relations in their brutality. We're seeing how they are becoming a reality within Haitian society. And we see when we accompany the families, nothing came out of the investigation of the murder and torture and rape of Natasha. Years later, we see that the same kind of crime occurs again. In 2016, it was a period when there was electoral upheaval. It was time when it was the transition between President Martelly to Mr. Moïse. It was a young agronomist, Miss Maville, who was a student of agronomy in Quisqueya University. She was raped, tortured, kidnapped, and they asked for money, even though the parents were trying to find the money to pay them. This is a major woman killing by the mafia in Haitian society. And to this day, we never found any word on this issue. What happened exactly since 2016? And more recently, there was Evelyn Sincere, her case. In that situation, we realized that whenever the crisis becomes more serious, the international community proposes solutions. They send these stabilization, quote unquote, forces, and they make this crisis even more serious. Whether it's gangs or kidnappings, they become aggravated. And we see how women are the ones that are paying a heavy price for this kind of situation within the society. All of these questions, we realize that all our leaders are leaders that are anti-feminist, and they have discourse, as I said in the article. If you go look at the article, how this discourse is constructed, if we look at the way, the discourse that should help us understand this cycle of violence against women, we see that it's the same way that the government puts together a structure of violence in insulting, using bad words, so that on the national scale, people cannot really voice their grievances, where the violence of the words is so strong, you can't even imagine that someone can respond in that way. And then they move on to action, which is rape, massacres, stealing land. All of this shows that we are not in children's play here. It's a whole structure where there are what we call legal bandits. It's a way of living, a way of dynamic in the politics that is bringing us to the situation that we're living, and women are paying a very, very heavy price for it. Thank you, Sabine. We are going to go on to Guerline and then Ninaj to end on this question. We don't have a lot of time left, but we would like to answer the other questions. Guerline, can you answer? Thank you. I was going to do a long detour on the issue of violence, but I'm going to simply say a few words, and I'm going to let the other members of the panel speak. Afterwards, we can sit down and think about these things. We're talking about internal violence and external violence, mental violence, bodily violence, institutional violence, constitutional violence, violence against women, collective violence, social violence, gender violence, domestic violence, democratic violence, violence of destabilization, medical violence, desocializing violence, agricultural violence, verbal violence. When we sit down to see what position we are in Haiti and in all the other places as well, let's think about what these types of violence, what role do they play that have led us to this situation? Thank you, Ninaj. Thank you, Sabine and Guerline, for the fact that you talk about these different types of violence. With refugee issues for the past 30 years, I have noticed another practice of violence from the United States. I remember at the start, when we started as Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees in 1994-95, when Clinton was president, I started to notice that it was a practice where there were several refugees. There was a short period where people could apply for refugee status from when they were in Haiti in 94 under Bill Clinton's administration, because he wanted to limit the number of Haitians coming to the US. He wanted to close Guantanamo, where there were 40,000 Haitians that went through Guantanamo. Excuse me. In Brooklyn, I started to notice that there were a number of women at that time. There was when FRAP was attacking, the organization was attacking a lot of leaders. Several refugees came in with the same story. They were president or vice president of an organization. They were beaten, where they were within inches of their lives. They were left on the ground. They wake up on a bed in the Christois neighborhood, in a place called St. Joseph Hospice. They get the visit of a representative of the US Embassy that offers them asylum in the US. One after the other, they would come into the office and say the same thing. And I saw that this was an actual practice where they targeted people. They went directly after them. And this is how a number of organization leaders were removed from their position. And I remember at the same time period, there was, excuse me, major universities here in the US that offered Haitian journalists scholarships and fellowships. And these were journalists that were talking about human rights realities in Haiti at a time when things were really difficult, and where journalists were targeted. It's the same thing now, but during that time, yes, journalists were being targeted and even killed. So many of them were offered fellowships, even though they were doing good work in Haiti. To this day, as we work with people who are coming in and applying for asylum, I have noticed in these last years, even right now, there are representatives of women's organizations that are on the ground in Haiti that are survivors of rape, working with women who are survivors of rape and all kinds of violence. They target them because of the work they do, also with other people who come after them. They have organized so that they can provide services to women who are survivors of such violence. There are women who are in the United States right now and applying for asylum. So that means that they have targeted them directly because of the fact that they are helping women and providing services to survivors of rape. They are raped again, and they are told why they are being attacked in such a way. So there are a number of them that are applying for asylum here. I wanted to offer that as another example of violence. Thank you. Thank you, Ninaj. I want to acknowledge also other elements of violence that are underscored by people in the chat, people who are listening, because we don't really have time to go into a discussion with the public. Violence takes many forms, yes. And when we even stop at physical violence, we know that, as Guerline mentioned, there are other forms of violence in the question of this linguistic violence, as Dr. de Graaf calls it, linguistic apartheid. These are things that we also have to include among the forms of violence, because we do not have much time left. We are going to continue inviting people so that they can look at the different articles that came in this special issue on Haiti in the NACLA review. And again, we are making efforts to translate into English and Kreyòl with Aibo Post these articles, and we're going to look at maybe translating into Spanish. We're going to ask the panelists to turn on their cameras and each person take a little while to give their last words, maybe what you want the audience to remember from this meeting and from the special issue. We are also going to start with Samuel, since Samuel was the one who started 2 hours ago, so that he can give his closing words. Okay, thank you to the panelists and everyone that was listening, the organizers. Thank you, Mamyrah. Even though you started with me, I think this 2 hours is really short for us to really go into this complex situation that Haiti is going through, because Haiti has history that is based on these concepts that we were trying to envisage. I think that maybe the audience didn't have enough time to really go deeply into these topics, but we hope that the people will read the articles and who watched, maybe they can better understand, and maybe there will be further spaces where we can discuss the various points. I would like to, especially for the people who have been listening and following this, who are living outside the country, whether it's diaspora or foreigners, for them to remember. I would like for them to understand that it's important for them to really seek to understand the true reality of Haiti under its different points before they take any kind of position, because there truly is ways that many images of Haiti, the way we talk about what is going on in Haiti, especially with the right-wing media that are truly not reflecting the true reality in Haiti. I would want it to draw people's attention to that. And the way they look at the concepts really do not go along, are not in accordance with the reality of the Haitian people. And in that sense, I think indeed that we are in a period where there is a need for solidarity, but this solidarity has to be solidarity that is based on our true reality. I think that that real solidarity can be expressed in your actions, in the way that you raise your voices in alongside the Haitian people, where you say what are the real true problems of Haiti, where, for example, we see it's clear that we need another structure to direct and lead the country. And it's not like where the United States that we have to have true democratic elections, and it's clear that we cannot have the elections with the government that is in place now, and we cannot have democratic elections in Haiti with the crisis such as it is. And at this point, it's clear that we have to overturn the cooking pot, where we remove the government. It's a de facto government because constitutionally it has lost any legitimacy, which it didn't even have at the beginning. We are coming into a transition that will allow us to have another mode for governance in the country, which goes along with the grievances and demands of the people, where we see that everyone has value, where we see the real reality of Haiti. And in that sense, we're asking you to participate in raising your voices in the documents, in the media, in the protests, to have people understand the problems as they are going on in Haiti. They need a Haitian solution, and we ask different people to manifest solidarity with the Haitian people. They cannot manifest solidarity with this de facto government. They cannot manifest solidarity using the solutions that the US government is proposing that are not part of the Haitian reality. Thank you, Samuel. We do not have a lot of time left. We're going to ask people to be brief, but I think that we have to thank Samuel for this call to action. James Darbouze, thank you for an invitation to contribute to this issue. Thank you for the debate. Unfortunately, the time was really short, so we didn't have time to develop everything, but I think that Samuel said the essentials in terms of conclusion. Relatives, comrades, Haitians in diaspora, Haitian Americans, that they understand that the imperialist US project is not our project. What we want for our country is not what they want. They are taking care of their business. They want to place the country in a situation where they can continue taking care of the business. We want a country where we can live with dignity and live our daily lives, live the same way as other people, so that, as Guerline was saying, without having to look for places where we can go, Chile, Brazil, to find life, because we want to build a country, we fought to build a country where we can live with dignity and respect. Thank you. Thank you, James. Sabine? Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to contribute to this issue, even though I know that it was not easy at all at one point. In terms of conclusion, what I can say is that it's important for us to find a space where we can express with our own voice what is really going on in Haiti, because there is not one opposition. It's a plural opposition that is multidimensional, whether you look at it on the inside or on the outside, whether it's women, LGBT, all these pressions enter and all these dimensions enter into the crisis. Also, Haitians do not want to undergo this referendum, as this de facto government has been trying to say. We want to sit down and decide on what path we will follow as a society. And this strategy of shocks is not what is going to bring effective solutions. We do not want what the president is asking for, which is intervention by the UN, because they bring cholera, illegitimate children, rape against men and women. It does not bring anything positive or constructive. We do not want those kinds of people in the country, because their project is a project of death, and the project of 1804 is a project for life. We do not want these people to speak on the international level for us. The U.S. Embassy, UN, they are not qualified to speak for us, because all they do is reinforce this project for death. What they bring is federated gangs within the society. We are not in a situation where, as Djems Olivier was saying, this is not the solution. And the fourth point that we can use to conclude is that we want another society. And anyone that wants to be in solidarity with us, they can't be standing in front of us or behind us. They have to be sitting at the table with us. As we make decisions, we have to find Haitian solutions at this one of many crises that we're going through. Djems Olivier, quickly, I want to say thank you. Thank you for the work of the team that is present here and inviting me to take part in this debate. Thank you to the panel. It was a good panel. And I'm not going to say more. Samuel, Sabine, and James Darbouze already said a lot about the crisis, but the only thing I can say is that whenever there is a crisis and you don't find a real solution, you just have a cosmetic solution, it becomes, it festers and it spreads. So the problems, I don't like to use the word crisis, as Sabine said. We need a change of paradigm. We see that the political crisis is the one that is most apparent, but there are many other crises that are eating away at the society. They talk about 4.4 million people. 44% of the society is in food insecurity, which is a serious situation. There are others, insecurity, physical insecurity, economic insecurity. All of these things are dimensions of the crisis that we didn't really talk about today and that need a solution. Thank you very much for this panel. Thank you for the publication, and I'm inviting everyone to read every single article in this issue, because they are valuable. Thank you very much.
Guerline.
Guerline's turn. Thank you for this excellent meeting with the great team that shared all this information. And before saying my last word, I want to thank Martin Jean and Rachel Cantave, who work on Looking for Life, and others who worked on the publication along with the rest of the collective. James Johnson, Rachel Cantave, thank you for their contribution to this issue. I wanted to end by mentioning when we said that internal violence, I want to have you know how right now, as we speak, there is a crisis with Haitians who had to flee and look for a way to make a living. They are stuck on the border between Mexico and the US. We know that they are on the border, but in addition, they are on 10 borders between Brazil, Chile, Venezuela, Panama, Mexico to come to this country. And we see the consequences of internal violence are incidences of external violence, where every day the United States deports even pregnant women, very young babies, 2-3-month-old. This external violence that are consequences of internal violence, we have to demand that they stop. It's like they look at Haiti, where they created a system. They put the country in a hotspot. While the house is burning down, they take babies and pregnant women, young men, young women, and they drop them in this burning house. What excuse is there for us to continue suffering such violence? This is why my call to you who are here, who are in Haiti, who are in the US, everywhere, for us to raise your voices against this violence. Call on President Biden, who came to the Haitian American community to say that he's going to be their champion. We do not want the same things that happened as what happened under President Trump to happen under President Biden. We ask that all these forms of violence stop. Stop deporting Haitians that are looking for life outside of the country because of the situation there. We demand that TPN be given immediately. TPS. What can they say to us when Venezuela has TPS? And Haiti is in the middle of the fire. Where's TPS for Haiti? So we are asking for a collective call to end internal violence, and the United States, that are the so-called friends of Haiti, stop this external violence. Thank you very much. Guerline. Ninaj I would like to thank the organizers, the panel, all the panelists who participated. Not just the panel, but the work that you're doing. The only thing I can say is it's important for all Haitians to respect the commitments, no matter where we are. As I said, there are a lot of people who left Haiti. They got to where they're going. They started working to send money home to survive. They didn't really enter into the struggle for whatever reason. Maybe they're traumatized, they are living another reality, but I think that we respect the work that we are doing in solidarity with the Cuban people, is that they recognize, they acknowledge, they have a community in every neighborhood to defend their revolution. And they know that once you have won a revolution, you never stop defending it, because it never stops. Haiti, which became independent since 1804, for our whole lives as Haitians, we have to defend what we earned and gained. We are not allowed, I don't know the word in Creole, we can't afford to just stand still. It's important for us all, no matter where we are, to respect this this commitment. Thank you. Thank you, Mehdi. I don't know if you want to share a few words with us.
Bon, oui, bon, d'après merci, non, bien sûr.
I wanted to thank you, of course. And since I'm a half panelist, I'm not a full panelist, I don't have a lot to say, but I learned a lot. I want to thank all the panelists. It's made me think a lot. And I'm sorry I couldn't share on some aspects that I am interested from Resistance. I thought a lot about that, and maybe it will inspire me to do further work. I was very happy to be with you. The questions were very interesting, and the answers. Thank you for this work, and thank you to the organizations. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, those who participated in putting together this special issue. We had to make some choices. So this panel is not representative of everything, but we invite you again to take a look at it, to take a look at the translations by Aibo Post. And we're going to think about the Spanish versions as well. I wanted to thank the interpreters, the team. Paul Bertoni and Robert Valsin were working from Creole to Spanish, and Garnered Châtelain and Nadine Modestin did the translation from Creole to English. Thank you for your work and your solidarity, your collaboration. And I'm going to pass the mic to Mark. But before doing that, I am going to raise my voice in this call. There's Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees who made a call to the Haitian diaspora and our allies here in the United States and in Latin America, Canada, to prepare an International Day of Solidarity with Haiti on March 29th. We chose this date because it's the anniversary of the 1987 Constitution that has been mentioned several times in the panel. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to pass the mic to Mark, and we'll see each other sous béton out in the streets. Thank you to the panelists, the contributors, all the members who came. I would like to underscore the importance of international solidarity. This is next weekend, licampip.org. Go to that and come out in the streets. That's how we are going to push forward the movement in Haiti. People who are risking their lives to defend their rights. The conversation has been short. If you want to pursue it, HSA has meetings every month, and we're going to continue. If you also join as member, I put the links on the chat, and that is how we're going to widen our audience and work on these themes that are important to us. We could maybe create a working group so that we can work on these issues. Thank you very much. Stay strong. The fight is just beginning. See you next time.